The crimson sunset bled across the Montana sky as Mackenzie Dawson's tears joined the rushing waters of the Yellowstone River, her shoulders shaking with each ragged sob that tore from her throat. She hadn't heard the approaching hoofbeats over the sound of her own grief, nor noticed the tall figure dismounting his dun stallion until his shadow fell across her huddled form. Montana Territory. 1876. Mackenzie didn't care who might discover her in this vulnerable state. The telegram had arrived that morning, and with it, her entire world had collapsed. Her father was dead, her home in St. Louis seized by creditors, and the teaching position she'd traveled west to claim had been given to someone else. At 22 years old, she was utterly alone in the wild frontier town of Whitewater Creek with only $17 to her name. "Madam, are you hurt?" The deep voice startled her, causing her to look up through tear-blurred eyes. The setting sun silhouetted the man, a black Stetson hat pulled low over his features, but she could make out broad shoulders and the unmistakable figure of a cowboy. Instinctively, Mackenzie scrambled back, suddenly aware of her isolation. "I'm fine," she managed, hastily wiping her face with her sleeve. "Please just leave me be." Instead of departing, the stranger crouched down, keeping a respectful distance. As he tilted his head, the dying sunlight revealed a weathered face with kind eyes the color of summer storms. "No offense, madam, but you don't look fine to me." His voice was gentle, with a hint of a southern drawl. "I'm Zachary Blackwood. I run the Double B Ranch about 5 miles east of here." Mackenzie swallowed hard, trying to compose herself. Ladies didn't break down in front of strangers. Her mother had taught her better than that. But her mother was 3 years in the grave, and now her father had joined her. "Mackenzie Dawson," she replied stiffly. "I apologize for my state, Mr. Blackwood. I've received some difficult news today." Zachary's expression softened. Sometimes the river's a good listener. He glanced at the rushing water. "I've shed my share of tears here too." His unexpected candor caught her off guard. This rough-hewn cowboy admitting to tears seemed so contrary to everything she'd heard about the hard men of the West. "You're not from around here," he observed, not unkindly. "St. Louis." Her voice cracked. "I came for a teaching position that no longer exists." Understanding dawned on his face. "You're the schoolteacher they were expecting. I heard talk in town that someone else took the post. The mayor's niece arrived early." Fresh tears threatened at the confirmation of her misfortune. "Yes, I received word this morning, along with news that my father has died. His debts have claimed our home." The admission made her situation painfully real. "I have nowhere to go." Zachary was quiet for a long moment, the only sound between them the rush of the river and the distant call of a nighthawk. Then, with a decisiveness that startled her, he extended his hand. "Miss Dawson, I can't fix what's broken in your life, but I promise you this: you won't be alone in facing what comes next." Mackenzie stared at his outstretched hand, calloused and strong from years of ranch work, and something in his steady gaze made her believe him. Against her better judgment, she placed her smaller hand in his. "I don't accept charity, Mr. Blackwood." A smile touched the corners of his mouth. "Good thing I'm not offering any. My sister Rebecca runs the house at Double B. She's been pestering me to find a governess for her 2 young ones since she's expecting another. She was a teacher herself before marrying my brother Benjamin." "Your brother?" Mackenzie asked, confusion momentarily displacing her grief. "Late brother," Zachary clarified, his eyes momentarily shadowed. "Took a bullet meant for me 2 years back. Rebecca stayed on the ranch, is as much hers as mine now." He paused. "Those children need education, Miss Dawson, and Rebecca needs help. It's honest work with fair pay, if you're interested." Mackenzie hesitated. Going to a stranger's ranch miles from town went against everything she'd been taught about propriety. Yet the alternative was sleeping on the streets of Whitewater Creek with winter approaching. "I would need references," she said finally, grasping at the protocols of her former life. Zachary chuckled, the sound warm in the gathering dusk. "Sheriff Miller in town knows me well enough, as does Reverend Thomas. You can ask either about my character." He stood, offering his hand again to help her up. "For tonight, I can take you to the Widow Carson's boarding house. Tomorrow, after you've checked my references, you can decide." Something about his straightforward manner and the genuine concern in his eyes made Mackenzie trust him. She took his offered hand and rose to her feet, suddenly aware of how exhausted she felt. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood." "Zach," he corrected. "Everyone calls me Zach." He led her to his horse, a magnificent dun stallion that towered over her 5'4" frame. Without warning, Zach's strong hands circled her waist, lifting her effortlessly onto the saddle. She gasped, unused to such familiar handling, but before she could protest, he swung up behind her. "Hold on," he instructed, reaching around her to take the reins. The closeness was shocking, improper, and yet in that moment, surrounded by his warmth as the evening chill descended, Mackenzie couldn't bring herself to object. The steady beat of his heart against her back was the first comforting thing she'd felt since opening that telegram. As they rode toward town, the stars emerging in the vast Montana sky, Mackenzie wondered if perhaps this unexpected encounter was the first step towards something she'd never dared hope for: a new beginning. Mrs. Carson's boarding house sat on the edge of Whitewater Creek, a 2-story clapboard structure with neat curtains and a well-swept porch. The widow herself answered Zach's knock, her eyes widening at the sight of Mackenzie's tear-stained face. "Zach Blackwood, what have you brought to my doorstep at this hour?" she asked, though her tone held no real censure. "Miss Dawson here was meant to be our new schoolteacher," Zach explained. "She's had some misfortune and needs lodging for the night. I'll settle her bill." Mrs. Carson's expression softened. "The teaching position that went to Margaret Hollister, that was poorly done." She opened the door wider. "Come in, dear. I've got stew on and a clean room upstairs." "I can pay for tonight," Mackenzie insisted, reaching for her reticule. "Tomorrow is soon enough," Mrs. Carson said firmly. "You look dead on your feet." Zach remained in the doorway. "I'll come by mid-morning," he told Mackenzie. "Take the night to consider my offer. Sheriff's office is just down the street if you want to inquire about me." Mackenzie nodded, suddenly feeling the full weight of the day's events. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood, Zach," she corrected herself. "Your kindness won't be forgotten." Something flickered in his gray eyes. "Get some rest, Miss Dawson." After he departed, Mrs. Carson ushered Mackenzie to a small dining room where 3 other boarders, 2 traveling salesmen, and an elderly lady were finishing their dinner. The widow served her a bowl of hearty beef stew and fresh bread, asking no questions as Mackenzie ate mechanically, too tired to taste the food. Later, in the simple but clean bedroom, Mackenzie finally allowed herself to examine the day's extraordinary turn of events. Her father was gone. Her inheritance was non-existent. And a stranger, a cowboy with storm-gray eyes, had found her at her lowest moment and offered her a lifeline. Sleep claimed her before she could determine whether to accept it. Morning brought clarity. After breakfast, Mackenzie walked to the sheriff's office, her steps determined. Sheriff Miller, a graying man with a handlebar mustache, looked up from his desk as she entered. "Good morning, miss. What can I do for you?" "I'm inquiring about the character of Mr. Zachary Blackwood," she said directly. "He's offered me employment, and I wish to know if he's trustworthy." The sheriff's eyebrows rose, then he broke into a hearty laugh. "Zach, he's salt of the earth, miss." fought alongside me in the war, then came back and built Double B into one of the finest spreads in the territory. His brother's widow and her youngsters couldn't ask for a better protector. He studied her thoughtfully. You must be the schoolteacher who got the short end of the stick. Word travels fast in Whitewater. Yes, that's me, Mackenzie confirmed, unsurprised that her misfortune was already common knowledge. Well, if Zach's offering you work, you could do a lot worse. He's a man of his word, and that ranch of his is proper and respectable. Her next stop was the small white church where Reverend Thomas echoed the sheriff's assessment. By the time Zach arrived at the boarding house, Mackenzie had made her decision. He was punctual, arriving at precisely 10 o'clock. The morning light revealed details she'd missed in the previous evening's distress: the streak of silver at his temple, despite him being no more than 35, the small scar that bisected his right eyebrow, and the way his presence seemed to fill any space he occupied. "Good morning, Miss Dawson," he greeted her, hat in hand. "You look better today." Sleep was restorative, she acknowledged. "I've spoken with both Sheriff Miller and Reverend Thomas. They speak highly of you." A hint of amusement touched his features. "Did they now?" "Sheriff probably left out the time I nearly burned down his jail trying to smoke out a raccoon." Despite herself, Mackenzie smiled. "He mentioned you were high-spirited in your youth." "That's generous phrasing." Zach's expression grew serious. "Have you considered my offer?" "I have," Mackenzie replied, squaring her shoulders. "I accept with conditions. I require a formal contract stating my duties and compensation. I'll need my own quarters, and I expect to be treated with the respect due to a professional educator." Far from being offended by her demands, Zach seemed impressed. "Those are reasonable terms. Rebecca will be pleased. She's particular about education. The children, Matthew and Sarah, are 6 and 4, bright but wild as March hares. When would you like me to start? Today, if you're willing." "My wagon's outside with supplies for the ranch. We can load your belongings and be at Double B by mid-afternoon." Mackenzie hesitated only briefly. "I'll gather my things." An hour later, they were headed east, away from Whitewater Creek. Mackenzie's worldly possessions, 2 trunks containing her clothes, books, and a few precious mementos, were secured in the back of the wagon. She sat beside Zach on the wooden seat, acutely aware of the vast, open landscape stretching in all directions. "It's different from St. Louis," Zach observed, correctly reading her expression. "Everything is so expansive," she replied. "I feel very small. It takes some getting used to. I came west after the war, couldn't stand walls around me anymore." He didn't elaborate, and Mackenzie didn't press. The war between the states had left scars on everyone, North and South alike. As they traveled, Zach pointed out landmarks and shared stories of the area. Gradually, Mackenzie found herself relaxing in his company. His manner was straightforward but never crude, and he treated her with a respect she hadn't always received in civilized society. "May I ask about your family?" he inquired as they forded a shallow creek. "Only if you're comfortable speaking of them." Mackenzie was silent for a moment, watching a hawk circle overhead. "My mother died of influenza 3 years ago. My father was a merchant, successful, or so I believed. After his heart failed, I discovered he'd been borrowing heavily to maintain appearances." The bitterness crept into her voice. "He left me nothing but debts and broken promises." Zach nodded, his eyes on the trail ahead. "Men often think they're protecting their womenfolk by hiding troubles." "It wasn't protection, it was pride," Mackenzie countered sharply. "If he'd been honest, I could have taken a position years ago, helped ease our situation." She caught herself. "I apologize. I shouldn't speak ill of the dead." "No need to apologize for honest feelings," Zach said. "Death doesn't make a man's mistakes vanish." His understanding, devoid of judgment, loosened something tight in Mackenzie's chest. For the first time since receiving the telegram, she felt the knot of grief and anger begin to unravel. "What about you?" she asked. "You mentioned your brother, but do you have other family?" A shadow crossed his face. "Parents are long gone. It's just Rebecca, the children, and me now. And the ranch hands, of course they're family of a sort." He smiled faintly. "You'll meet Miguel, my foreman, been with me since I claimed the land. Wade and Illy are our best hands. There's Cookie, who'd rather shoot a man than hear criticism of his biscuits, and about a dozen others who come and go with the seasons." The sun was high when they crested a rise, and Zach pulled the wagon to a halt. "There it is, Double B," Mackenzie gasped. Below them stretched a picturesque valley. A two-story ranch house of weathered timber stood proud amid several outbuildings. A large barn, corrals filled with horses, and bunkhouses formed a protective circle around the main house. In the distance, cattle grazed on the rolling grassland that stretched to the mountains on the horizon. "It's beautiful," she breathed. Pride warmed Zach's voice. "Took 10 years of sweat and blood, but she's a good spread. Benjamin and I built every structure you see with our own hands." As they approached, a woman emerged from the house, shielding her eyes against the sun. Two small children darted around her skirts, their excited voices carrying across the yard. "Uncle Zach! Uncle Zach!" Zach's face transformed, his usual reserve melting into genuine delight as he brought the wagon to a stop. Before he could climb down, the children were swarming up to him. He lifted them both effortlessly, one in each arm, their laughter ringing in the clear air. "You scamps been behaving for your mama?" he asked, setting them down. "Yes," they chorused, though the woman approaching with a skeptical expression suggested otherwise. Rebecca Blackwood was visibly pregnant, her condition not hidden by her practical dress. She had the same storm-gray eyes as her brother-in-law, though her hair was a lighter brown streaked with gold. Her gaze moved curiously to Mackenzie. "You must be the teacher Zach mentioned in his note," she said, extending her hand. "Rebecca Blackwood, welcome to our home. Mackenzie Dawson." "Thank you for having me." Mackenzie took the offered hand, noting the strength in Rebecca's grip. "These hooligans are Matthew and Sarah," Rebecca continued, gesturing to the children who were now regarding Mackenzie with undisguised curiosity. "They've worn out 3 tutors already." "We didn't mean to make Miss Jenkins cry," the boy Matthew protested. "We just wanted to see if her spectacles would float." Mackenzie bit back a smile. "I don't wear spectacles, so we needn't test that theory." The little girl, Sarah, tugged at Mackenzie's skirt. "Are you going to live with us forever and ever?" "Sarah," Rebecca admonished. "Miss Dawson is here as your governess, not as a permanent fixture." Something in her tone made Mackenzie glance at Zach, who was suddenly very interested in unhitching the horses. There was a story there, she sensed, but now wasn't the time to puzzle it out. "Let's get you settled," Rebecca said, leading Mackenzie toward the house. "The children's schoolroom is on the first floor, and we've prepared the guest room upstairs for you. It has its own entrance from the side porch, so you'll have privacy." The ranch house was surprisingly refined inside, with polished wooden floors, quality furniture, and even a piano in the parlor. Rebecca, seeing Mackenzie's surprise, smiled. Benjamin believed a home should be civilized, even in the wilderness, and Zach indulges my few luxuries. "It's lovely," Mackenzie said sincerely. "My mother would have approved." Rebecca's expression softened. "Zach mentioned you recently lost your father. I'm sorry for your grief." "Thank you." Mackenzie was saved from further response by the children, who were eager to show her the schoolroom. The designated space was well equipped with a large chalkboard, a sturdy table with chairs, and shelves filled with books, more than she'd expected to find on a remote ranch. A globe stood in one corner and maps hung on the walls. "This is wonderful," she told the expectant children. "We'll begin lessons tomorrow morning." "Do we have to?" Matthew groaned. "Yes," Mackenzie said firmly, "but I promise you'll find learning more exciting than you expect." After settling into her room, a pleasant chamber with a feather bed, washstand, and window overlooking the mountains, Mackenzie joined the family for dinner. The long table in the dining room accommodated Zach, Rebecca, the children, and Miguel, the foreman, a dignified Mexican man with silver-streaked black hair. The conversation flowed easily, with tales of ranch life and gentle teasing. Mackenzie observed how Zach deferred to Rebecca in household matters while maintaining clear authority in ranch business. It was a partnership of mutual respect that she found unexpectedly appealing. Later, as dusk painted the sky in lavender and gold, Mackenzie stood on the porch, absorbing the peacefulness of her new surroundings. The sound of boots on wood alerted her to Zach's approach. "Settling in all right?" he asked, leaning against the railing beside her. "Yes, thank you." "Your home is not what I expected," he raised an eyebrow. "What did you expect? Something more primitive, I suppose?" She smiled apologetically. "My knowledge of ranch life comes entirely from dime novels." Zach laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "Those writers have never set foot west of the Mississippi, though I admit it wasn't always this comfortable. The first winter, Benjamin and I slept in a lean-to with only a campfire between us and freezing to death. You must have been very determined, or very foolish." His expression grew thoughtful. "After what we saw in the war, we needed something to build, not destroy." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the first stars appear. "Miss Dawson," Zach began, then paused. "Mackenzie, I want you to know that, although your position here began from unfortunate circumstances, you're welcome to stay as long as you wish. The children need stability, and Rebecca needs support." Mackenzie studied his profile in the fading light. "And what do you need, Mr. Blackwood?" His eyes met hers, something unreadable in their depths. "Peace, I suppose, like most men who have seen too much." The honesty of his answer touched her. "I hope you find it." A smile touched his lips. "I reckon I'm closer to it than I've been in a long while." He straightened, donning his hat. "I'll bid you good night. Dawn comes early on a ranch." As she watched him walk toward the bunkhouse, Mackenzie felt an unexpected flutter in her chest. She firmly suppressed it. She was here to teach, to rebuild her life from the ashes of her father's mistakes. Romance had no place in her plans, especially not with a man whose life was so different from everything she'd known. Yet as she prepared for bed in her new room, she couldn't help but remember the warmth of his hand when he'd helped her rise from the riverbank, and the simple, powerful promise that she wouldn't be alone. The next morning brought Mackenzie's first challenge as governess. Matthew and Sarah, initially curious about their new teacher, quickly revealed the mischievous streaks that had driven away their predecessors. "I don't want to learn arithmetic," Matthew declared, pushing away the slate Mackenzie had prepared with simple problems. "I'm going to be a rancher like Uncle Zach, and he says he only needs to count cows and coins." "Really?" Mackenzie raised an eyebrow. "And how will you know if you've been paid fairly for your cattle if you can't calculate the price per head? Or how will you measure fence lines and pasture acreage?" The boy looked momentarily stumped. "Furthermore," Mackenzie continued, "your uncle manages one of the largest ranches in the territory. Do you think he does that without understanding numbers?" "No, madam," Matthew mumbled. Sarah, not to be outdone by her brother, chose that moment to release a small grass snake she'd hidden in her pinafore pocket. Instead of screaming as the child clearly expected, Mackenzie calmly picked up the creature. "What a fine specimen," she observed, holding it gently. In fact, this presents an excellent opportunity for a natural science lesson. For the next hour, she guided the children through an impromptu study of reptiles, incorporating drawing, observation, and even basic mathematics as they measured the snake before releasing it outside. By midday, Mackenzie had established a tenuous authority, and the children were grudgingly engaged in their lessons. Rebecca, who had quietly observed part of the morning's activities, nodded approvingly when Mackenzie released them for the noon meal. "You handled them well," she said as they walked to the kitchen. "Most teachers try to break their spirits. I won't have that. Children learn best when their curiosity is channeled, not suppressed," Mackenzie replied. "My mother taught me that. She educated me at home until I was 12. Rebecca smiled. "We're going to get along splendidly, I think." The days fell into a rhythm. Mornings were devoted to the children's education, afternoons to helping Rebecca with household tasks, or continuing lessons through practical applications, counting eggs from the henhouse, measuring ingredients for recipes, or identifying plants in Rebecca's kitchen garden. Evenings were spent in the parlor, where Mackenzie often read aloud while Rebecca sewed baby clothes and Zach reviewed ledgers or cleaned tack. Zach himself remained something of a mystery to Mackenzie. He was unfailingly polite, even kind, but maintained a certain distance. He rose before dawn and often returned after dark, the demands of the ranch keeping him busy from sunup to sundown. Yet she would occasionally catch him watching her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken, only for him to look away when their eyes met. October gave way to November, bringing crisp mornings and the threat of early snow. The ranch became a flurry of activity as the men prepared for winter, storing hay, repairing buildings, and ensuring the cattle had sheltered areas in case of blizzards. One evening, as frost traced delicate patterns on the windows, Mackenzie sat at the piano, playing a simple melody while the children listened. Rebecca had retired early, her pregnancy making her increasingly tired. "That's pretty," Sarah said drowsily, leaning against Mackenzie's side. "Can you sing, too?" "A little," Mackenzie admitted, launching into a gentle lullaby her mother had sung to her. She was so absorbed in the music that she didn't notice Zach enter until Sarah called out to him. "Uncle Zach, Miss Mackenzie is singing like an angel." Mackenzie's fingers faltered on the keys as she turned to find him standing in the doorway, his expression unguarded for once. Something in his gaze made her cheeks warm. "Don't stop on my account," he said softly. She turned back to the piano, suddenly nervous. "It's just a simple song." Simple things are often the most beautiful. He crossed to the fireplace, adding another log to the flames. "My mother used to sing that same lullaby." The shared connection surprised her. Was she musical? Very. "She taught piano in Virginia before marrying my father." A shadow crossed his face. "The war took her not directly, but the grief after my father fell at Gettysburg." Mackenzie's hands stilled on the keys. "I'm sorry," he shrugged, the movement not as casual as he perhaps intended. "It was a long time ago." Matthew, fighting sleep in the corner armchair, yawned hugely. "Tell us a story, Uncle Zach, one about the war." "No war stories," Zach said firmly. "Those aren't fit for young ears." He glanced at Mackenzie. "Or present company. I'm not as sheltered as you might think, Mr. Blackwood," she replied. "St. Louis saw its share of the conflict. Even so." He scooped up his drowsy nephew. "Time for bed, young man. You too, Sarah." Mackenzie helped settle Sarah in the children's room they shared upstairs, tucking the little girl in beside her already sleeping brother. The child's small hand caught hers as she turned to leave. "Miss Mackenzie, are you going to marry Uncle Zach?" The innocent question nearly made Mackenzie drop the lamp she was holding. "What? No, of course not. I'm your governess, Sarah." but you look at him like Mama used to look at Papa. And he watches you when you don't see. Heat bloomed in Mackenzie's cheeks. That's enough nonsense for tonight. Sleep well, little one. Downstairs, she found Zach still in the parlor, standing before the fireplace, one arm braced against the mantel as he stared into the flames. The firelight cast his features in sharp relief, highlighting the strong jaw and the furrow between his brows. "They're asleep," she said, announcing her presence. He straightened, composing his features. "Thank you. They've grown attached to you and I to them." It was true. In just a month, the children had worked their way into her heart with their spirited personalities and affectionate natures. Mackenzie moved to the piano, closing the cover over the keys. "Your sister-in-law has created a wonderful home here. The children are fortunate." "Rebecca's the heart of this place," Zach agreed. "Without her." He trailed off, shaking his head. "When Benjamin died, I thought she'd return east to her family. I'm grateful every day that she stayed." "She loves it here," Mackenzie observed. "It's evident in everything she does." "And you?" His question was quiet but direct. "Have you found any contentment at Double B?" The unexpected inquiry made Mackenzie pause. Had she? A month ago, she'd been weeping by a river, her future a frightening void. Now she had purpose, security, and she realized with some surprise happiness. "Yes," she admitted, "more than I expected to find after losing everything." Zach took a step toward her, then seemed to think better of it. "I'm glad. Good night, Miss Dawson." As he left the parlor, Mackenzie felt a curious mixture of disappointment and relief. Sarah's innocent question had stirred something she'd been trying to ignore, an awareness of Zachary Blackwood not just as her employer, but as a man. A man whose quiet strength and hidden depths intrigued her more with each passing day. Such thoughts were dangerous. Her position here depended on propriety and professionalism. And yet, as she climbed the stairs to her room, she couldn't help but wonder if Sarah had been right about Zach watching her when she wasn't looking. The first heavy snow came in early December, blanketing the ranch in pristine white. The children were ecstatic, begging to go sledding on the gentle slope behind the barn. Mackenzie, seeing an opportunity for both education and enjoyment, incorporated their winter activities into lessons measuring snowfall, observing animal tracks, and studying the crystalline structure of snowflakes brought carefully inside on black wool. One afternoon, as Mackenzie supervised the children building a snow fort, Zach rode into the yard with several of his hands. They'd been checking on distant cattle, making sure the animals had access to feed despite the snow. He dismounted with fluid grace, handing his reins to Miguel before walking toward the laughing trio. "Looks like you're fortifying against attack," he observed, amusement warming his voice. "We're defending against marauding wolves," Matthew declared dramatically. "Is that so?" Zach stooped to inspect their handiwork. "Well, you've left your southern flank unprotected. A smart wolf would circle around and surprise you." Sarah gasped in mock horror. "Quick, Matthew, fix the wall." As the children scrambled to repair their defenses, Zach straightened, brushing snow from his gloved hands. His eyes met Mackenzie's, and the smile they shared felt conspiratorial, intimate. "You've snow in your hair," he said, reaching out before seeming to catch himself. Mackenzie touched her hair self-consciously. "The children are enthusiastic defenders. I can see that." He glanced at the darkening sky. "Storm's coming in. We should get inside soon." As if to emphasize his point, the wind picked up, driving stinging particles of snow against their faces. Mackenzie called to the children, who protested briefly before the increasing chill convinced them to comply. They had just reached the porch when the wind truly began to howl, transforming the gentle snowfall into a swirling white fury. Zach ushered them inside, where Rebecca was setting the table for supper. Just in time, she said, looking up with relief. The men, all accounted for and in the bunkhouse, Zach assured her. Cattle are as protected as we can make them. The storm intensified throughout the evening, rattling windows and sending drafts through the sturdy house, despite its solid construction. After the children were put to bed, the adults gathered in the parlor, where the fire roared in defiance of the blizzard outside. Rebecca worked on her sewing while Zach reviewed ledgers at the desk in the corner. Mackenzie had brought mending down from her room but found herself staring into the flames instead, her mind wandering. "Penny for your thoughts," Rebecca said gently, breaking the comfortable silence. Mackenzie smiled. "I was thinking about Christmas. It will be my first away from home." Rebecca's expression softened. "Ours is a simple celebration but heartfelt. The children cut a tree from the North Ridge and we decorate with strings of berries and paper ornaments." "That sounds lovely." "You should join us for the preparations," Zach said unexpectedly, looking up from his work. "If you'd like to." "I'd enjoy that very much," Mackenzie replied, warmed by the inclusion. Rebecca set aside her sewing with a wince, pressing a hand to her lower back. Seeing the gesture, Zach was immediately at her side. "Is it time?" he asked, concern etching his features. She shook her head. "Just discomfort. This one's restless tonight." She attempted to rise, and Zach helped her to her feet. "I think I'll retire early." "I'll check on the children and do the same," Mackenzie said, gathering her mending. After Rebecca had gone upstairs, Mackenzie paused in the parlor doorway. "Good night, Mr. Blackwood." "Zach," he corrected, as he had countless times before. "After all this time, surely we can dispense with formalities." Something in his tone made her meet his gaze. "Zach," she acknowledged softly. "Mackenzie." Her name on his lips sounded different, somehow warmer, more personal. "Sleep well." The children were fast asleep, undisturbed by the storm that shook their window panes. Mackenzie tucked the quilts more securely around them, brushing a gentle hand over Sarah's tousled curls before retiring to her own room. Despite her exhaustion, sleep proved elusive. The wind's mournful wail and the occasional groan of timber as the house withstood the blizzard's assault kept her alert. When a particularly violent gust rattled her window, Mackenzie rose to ensure it was securely latched. Drawing back the curtain, she gasped at the wild beauty of the storm. Moonlight occasionally broke through the racing clouds, illuminating the swirling snow like silver dust. Movement caught her eye, a dark figure trudging through the blinding whiteness toward the barn. Zach. She recognized his powerful silhouette instantly, even bundled against the cold. What could be so urgent that he'd venture out in such conditions? Without conscious decision, Mackenzie grabbed her shawl and hurried downstairs. The kitchen was dark and cold, but she quickly found a lantern and matches. Wrapping herself in her heaviest cloak from the peg by the door, she stepped onto the porch. The cold hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath. Wind-driven snow stung her exposed face as she held the lantern high, trying to see through the whiteout conditions. The barn was barely visible, a darker shadow in the swirling white. Gathering her courage, Mackenzie descended the porch steps and began to push through the knee-deep snow. The short distance to the barn seemed to stretch endlessly as the wind fought her progress. By the time she reached the large doors, her fingers were numb despite her woolen gloves. She struggled with the heavy door, finally managing to pull it open enough to slip inside. The relative quiet and warmth were shocking after the storm's fury. Lantern light revealed the long center aisle between stalls, where horses shifted and nickered softly. "Zach," she called, her voice sounding unnaturally loud. A grunt of effort answered her from the far end, where light spilled from an open stall. Mackenzie hurried forward to find Zach kneeling beside a downed horse, his coat discarded despite the barn's chill. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, looking up with a mixture of surprise and concern. "I saw you from my window," she explained, setting her lantern on a nearby barrel. "I thought you might need help." His expression softened slightly. "It's Daisy, one of our broodmares. She's foaling early." Mackenzie moved closer, seeing now the straining sides of the horse and the focused intensity of Zach's posture. "Is that dangerous in winter?" "Can be," he admitted, turning back to the laboring animal. "The timing's wrong and she's struggling." Without being asked, Mackenzie knelt beside him, her skirts sinking into the straw. "Tell me what to do." Zach glanced at her, surprise evident in his features. "This isn't ladies' work." "Neither is trudging through blizzards, yet here I am," she replied steadily. "I want to help." A smile ghosted across his face. "You're not what I expected, Mackenzie Dawson. So I've been told. Now instruct me." For the next hour they worked together in the lantern-lit stall. Zach guided Mackenzie in comforting the distressed mare while he positioned the foal for delivery. His hands were sure and gentle, his voice a constant soothing murmur to both horse and human. Mackenzie found herself fascinated by this side of him, patient, focused, and impossibly tender with the suffering animal. When the foal finally emerged in a rush of fluid and effort, Zach's expression of relief and joy was transformative. "A filly," he announced, quickly clearing the newborn's nostrils and mouth. "Come here, look at her." Mackenzie moved closer as the wobbly-legged foal attempted to rise for the first time. The sight was miraculous, this new life emerging in the midst of winter's harshest fury. "She's beautiful," Mackenzie whispered, watching the mare nuzzle her baby. Zach nodded, satisfaction evident in every line of his body. "She'll be strong, this one. Born in a blizzard, that's an auspicious beginning." They sat in companionable silence, watching mother and foal bond. Mackenzie was acutely aware of Zach beside her, their shoulders nearly touching in the confined space. His presence felt different here, more open, less guarded. "You surprise me," he said finally, his voice low. "Most city women would have fainted at the sight of a foaling." "Perhaps you've known the wrong city women," she countered with a small smile. His answering chuckle warmed something deep inside her. "Perhaps I have." Their eyes met in the soft lantern light, and Mackenzie felt a shift between them, something fundamental changing in that quiet moment, surrounded by the sounds of new life and the storm's distant howl. The spell was broken when Daisy shifted, drawing their attention back to the miracle before them. Zach rose, offering Mackenzie his hand. "We should let them rest, and you're half frozen." Only then did she realize she was shivering, her cloak and dress damp from snow and the exertion of the birth. Zach frowned, shrugging out of his flannel shirt and draping it around her shoulders over her cloak, leaving himself in just his undershirt. "You'll catch your death," she protested. "I'm accustomed to the cold," he replied, though she noticed the goosebumps rising on his arms. "Come, let's get back to the house." The blizzard had intensified during their time in the barn. Zach wrapped one strong arm around Mackenzie's shoulders, pulling her close against his side as they faced the onslaught together. The journey back to the house was a blur of stinging cold and the solid warmth of his body guiding her through the whiteout. Once inside, they stood dripping in the kitchen, both breathing hard from the exertion. In the dim light of the bank stove, Mackenzie became acutely aware of their proximity and state of disarray. Her hair had come loose from its pins, and Zach's undershirt clung to his muscled torso. "You should change immediately," he said, his voice rough. "I'll stoke the fire in the parlor." Mackenzie nodded, suddenly shy. "Thank you for letting me help. Thank you for coming." His eyes held hers for a long moment. Not many would have braved that storm. I was worried about you, she admitted softly. Something flickered in his expression surprise, followed by a warmth that had nothing to do with physical temperature. Get changed before you catch cold, Mackenzie. In her room, as she shed her wet clothes for a dry nightgown and robe, Mackenzie's mind replayed that moment in the barn the way Zach had looked at her, as if seeing her truly for the first time. She had felt something shift between them, a barrier dissolving. Downstairs, she found Zach in the parlor, stoking the fire to blazing life. He had changed as well, into dry clothes that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the lean strength of his frame. You should be in bed, he said without turning. As should you, she countered, moving to stand beside him before the fire. But I find I'm too awake now. He straightened, studying her face in the firelight. It happens that way sometimes after intensity the body refuses rest. Yes. She hesitated, then asked the question that had been forming since she saw him trudge through the blizzard. Why did you go out alone? Surely one of your men would have helped. Zach's expression softened. They would have, without question. But they'd worked hard all day, and I heard Daisy's distress myself. He shrugged. I don't ask others to do what I won't do myself. The simple statement encapsulated so much of what she'd come to admire about him: his integrity, his willingness to shoulder burdens, his care for all under his protection. The foal is fortunate to have such a guardian, Mackenzie said quietly. As are we all, came Rebecca's voice from the doorway. She stood there in her dressing gown, one hand supporting her rounded belly. I heard voices. Is everything all right? Zach quickly explained about Daisy and the newborn filly. Rebecca smiled knowingly, glancing between them. And you helped, Mackenzie. How unexpected. There was something in her tone that made Mackenzie flush. It seemed the right thing to do. Indeed. Rebecca's smile widened. Well, since we're all awake, perhaps some hot chocolate is in order. I find I'm craving something sweet. The three of them gathered in the kitchen, where Zach built up the stove while Mackenzie and Rebecca prepared the treat. The domesticity of the moment struck Mackenzie forcefully, how quickly she had found her place in this household. How natural it felt to move around the kitchen with Rebecca, anticipating each other's needs. As they sipped their chocolate, Rebecca winced suddenly, pressing a hand to her side. Another pain? Zach asked sharply. Just practice contractions, the doctor says, she assured him. Still a few weeks to go. But there was uncertainty in her eyes that made Mackenzie uneasy. This was Rebecca's third child, and she would know better than most what her body was telling her. Perhaps you should rest, Mackenzie suggested gently. The storm has blocked the roads. It would be difficult to fetch the doctor if needed. Rebecca nodded, allowing Zach to help her upstairs. When he returned to the kitchen, his expression was troubled. You're worried, Mackenzie observed. Her time with Matthew and Sarah was difficult, he admitted. The doctor in town warned this birth might be more complicated due to her age. Mackenzie reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. She's strong and well cared for. Try not to borrow trouble. His fingers turned, capturing hers in a gentle grip. You've become a necessary part of this household, Mackenzie. I want you to know that. The simple statement, delivered with such quiet sincerity, touched her deeply. I've come to feel the same way about all of you. They sat in companionable silence, hands still joined across the table, as the blizzard continued its assault on the world outside. In that moment, Mackenzie realized with startling clarity that somewhere between the riverbank where he'd found her and this warm kitchen, she had fallen in love with Zachary Blackwood. The revelation should have frightened her, yet it settled in her heart with the rightness of a puzzle piece finding its place. Whether he could ever return, such feelings remained uncertain, but in that moment, with his hand warm around hers, Mackenzie allowed herself to hope. The blizzard raged for 3 days, isolating the ranch in a cocoon of white. When it finally cleared, the world emerged transformed pristine drifts sculpted by the wind, icicles hanging like crystal daggers from the eaves, and a sky so intensely blue it hurt the eyes. Zach and his men worked tirelessly to dig out paths between buildings, check on distant cattle, and assess damage from the storm. Mackenzie kept the children occupied with lessons and indoor activities, while keeping a watchful eye on Rebecca, whose practice contractions seemed to be increasing in frequency. On the 4th day after the storm, as Mackenzie was helping the children fashion paper chains for Christmas decorations, a cry from upstairs sent her racing to Rebecca's room. She found the woman doubled over beside her bed, clutching her belly. "The baby," Rebecca gasped. "It's coming. Too early." Mackenzie helped her to the bed. "I'll send Matthew for Zach. Try to breathe slowly." Events moved quickly after that. Zach dispatched Miguel to town for the doctor, though all knew the snow-blocked roads might make his arrival too late. The children were settled in the kitchen with Cookie, who distracted them with stories and baking. In Rebecca's room, Mackenzie found herself pressed into service as midwife, her only qualifications being that she was a woman and had assisted in the foaling. The irony wasn't lost on her as she followed Rebecca's gasped instructions and her own limited knowledge gleaned from books. "I'm afraid," Rebecca admitted during a brief respite between contractions. "Benjamin isn't here this time." Mackenzie squeezed her hand. "But Zach is, and so am I." "We won't leave you." Zach paced the hallway outside, entering only when Rebecca called for him. The raw fear in his eyes when he looked at his sister-in-law revealed the depth of his love for his brother's family. Hours passed in a blur of effort and pain. As the winter sun began to set, casting long shadows across the bedroom floor, Rebecca's strength began to flag. "Something's wrong," she whispered to Mackenzie. "The baby should have come by now." Mackenzie felt a chill that had nothing to do with the December air. "What can I do?" Rebecca's eyes were fever-bright with pain and fear. "If it comes to a choice between me and the baby, don't," Mackenzie interrupted fiercely. "Don't even think it. You're both going to be fine." But as another hour passed with little progress, Mackenzie's certainty wavered. Rebecca was weakening visibly, her skin ashen, her grip on Mackenzie's hand growing feebler. When Zach entered the room again, Mackenzie pulled him aside. "We need the doctor," she whispered urgently. "Something isn't right." The look he gave her was haunted. "Miguel hasn't returned." "The road must be impassable." "Then we need to do something ourselves," Mackenzie insisted. "I've read about difficult births. Sometimes the baby is positioned wrongly." Zach's expression shifted from despair to focused determination. "Like with Daisy's foal." "Yes." "The principle must be similar, though I hesitate to do it," Rebecca called weakly from the bed. "Please, Mackenzie, save my baby." With trembling hands but resolute spirit, Mackenzie did what she had seen Zach do with the mare, carefully determining the baby's position and gently, so gently, helping to turn it. Zach stayed by his sister-in-law's side, supporting her through contractions that seemed to drain what little strength she had left. Just as Mackenzie was beginning to fear the worst, there was a change. The baby moved, finding the right path at last. With renewed purpose, she encouraged Rebecca through the final, exhausting push that brought a tiny, perfect boy into the world. His first cry was the sweetest sound Mackenzie had ever heard. Tears streamed down her face as she cleaned the infant and wrapped him in the soft blanket Rebecca had prepared. "A son," she said, placing the bundle in the exhausted mother's arms. "Perfect in every way." Rebecca's smile was radiant despite her exhaustion. "Benjamin," she whispered. "His name is Benjamin." Zach's face, when he looked at his namesake nephew, held such a mixture of joy and sorrow that Mackenzie felt her heart might break. He touched the infant's cheek with reverent fingers, then leaned down to kiss his sister-in-law's forehead. "He would be so proud," he said hoarsely, "of both of you." Mackenzie slipped from the room, giving them privacy for this bittersweet family moment. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall, suddenly aware of how drained she felt. The adrenaline that had carried her through the difficult birth was ebbing, leaving her shaky and vulnerable. She hadn't heard Zach follow her until his arms were around her, pulling her against his chest in an embrace that felt like coming home. Mackenzie didn't resist, allowing herself to absorb his strength and warmth. "You saved them," he murmured into her hair. "Rebecca, the baby, I can never repay what you've done today." Mackenzie drew back slightly, looking up at his face. "There's nothing to repay. They're my family too now." The words had slipped out unintended, but she couldn't regret them when she saw the effect they had on Zach. His expression softened, the barriers he habitually maintained falling away completely. "Yes," he agreed softly. "You are family." His hand came up to cup her cheek, and Mackenzie felt the world narrow to just this moment, just this touch. When he lowered his head, she rose to meet him, their lips connecting in a kiss that felt inevitable, as if all the moments since that first meeting by the river had been leading here. It was gentle at first, tentative, but deepened as Mackenzie responded, her hands sliding up to his shoulders. The taste of him, the solid reality of his body against hers, the tenderness in his touch all combined to create a perfect moment of connection that transcended the exhaustion and emotion of the day. When they finally parted, Zach rested his forehead against hers, his breathing uneven. "I've wanted to do that since I found you by the river," he confessed. Mackenzie smiled, her heart too full for words. Instead, she reached up to touch his face, tracing the line of his jaw with wondering fingers. A cry from the newborn in the next room broke the spell. Reality rushed back. They were standing in the hallway. Rebecca and the baby needed attention, and the children would be worried. "I should check on them," Mackenzie said reluctantly. Zach nodded, releasing her but catching her hand before she could move away. "We'll talk later." "Yes," she promised, squeezing his fingers before slipping back into Rebecca's room. The next days passed in a blur of activity. Rebecca recovered her strength gradually, while baby Benjamin thrived despite his early arrival. Matthew and Sarah were enchanted with their new brother, constantly wanting to help with his care. Miguel had finally returned with the doctor, who arrived to find his patients doing remarkably well under Mackenzie's care. His approval of her emergency measures bolstered her confidence, though she still marveled at her own boldness in the moment of crisis. Through it all, Zach and Mackenzie moved in a state of heightened awareness of each other. Meaningful glances across rooms, fingers brushing when passing objects, standing perhaps closer than strictly necessary when speaking, small signs of the profound shift in their relationship that had yet to be fully acknowledged. The promised conversation had been delayed by the constant demands of ranch life and a household with a newborn. Mackenzie tried to be patient, understanding that Zach's responsibilities left little time for personal matters. Still, she found herself longing for a moment alone with him, to confirm that the kiss they'd shared wasn't merely the product of emotional exhaustion and relief. Christmas approached rapidly. One morning, Zach announced he would take Matthew to cut a tree from the North Ridge, as was their tradition. To Mackenzie's surprise, he asked if she would accompany them. "Sarah is still getting over her cold and Rebecca needs rest," he explained. "We could use a woman's eye to select the perfect tree." Matthew bounced with excitement at the prospect of the expedition. "Please come, Miss Mackenzie. Last year, Uncle Zach picked a tree that was too big for the parlor and had to cut off the top. That was your doing, young man, Zach corrected with mock severity. You insisted on the tallest pine on the ridge. Mackenzie laughed at their banter. I'd be delighted to join you, though I warn you I've never selected a Christmas tree before. Zach's eyebrow rose. Never, Incent. Louis, we purchased ours from a vendor, she explained. Already cut and delivered to our door. Then you're in for a treat, he promised, his eyes warming. There's nothing like finding your own tree in the forest. They set out after breakfast, bundled against the December cold. Matthew rode his pony while Mackenzie shared Zach's horse, seated before him in the saddle. The arrangement was decidedly intimate, his arms around her to hold the reins, his chest warm against her back. Is this proper, Mr. Blackwood? She teased quietly as they set off, Matthew riding ahead. Not in the least, Miss Dawson, he replied, his breath warm against her ear. But I find I'm less concerned with propriety these days. The North Ridge was beautiful in its winter dress, evergreens heavy with snow, sunlight sparkling on the pristine white ground. They spent a pleasant hour examining potential candidates, with Matthew rejecting several as too skinny or too crooked, before finally declaring a 7-foot blue spruce perfect. As Zach prepared to cut the tree, Mackenzie stood with Matthew a safe distance away, admiring the peaceful forest scene. The boy slipped his mittened hand into hers with easy affection. Uncle Zach smiles more since you came, he observed with a child's directness. Before, he only smiled for me and Sarah. Mackenzie glanced down at him, touched by the simple statement. Does he? I hadn't noticed. Matthew nodded solemnly. Mama says his heart was too sad after Papa died, but it's getting better now. Before she could respond to this revelation, Zach called out a warning. The tree came down with a soft whoosh, landing in the deep snow. Matthew cheered, releasing Mackenzie's hand to run forward and help his uncle secure the tree to the travois they'd brought for transport. On the journey home, with Matthew riding ahead again, Mackenzie found the courage to broach the subject that had been hovering between them. Zach, she began hesitantly, about what happened after Benjamin was born. His arms tightened slightly around her. I've been wanting to speak with you about that. I owe you an apology. Her heart sank. An apology? For taking liberties in a moment when you were vulnerable. It was ungentlemanly of me. Mackenzie turned slightly in the saddle to see his face. Is that all it was to you, taking liberties? His expression softened. No, it was the most honest thing I've done in years. He paused, choosing his words carefully. But I don't want you to feel obligated or confused because of the circumstances. I'm neither obligated nor confused, she assured him. Though I am beginning to wonder if you regret it. Regret kissing you. Zach's laugh was soft and genuine. Mackenzie, the only thing I regret is that we've had no chance to do it again. Relief and joy flooded through her. Then perhaps we should remedy that situation at the first opportunity. His smile was slow and full of promise. I believe that can be arranged. They returned to the ranch to find Rebecca sitting on the porch despite the cold, baby Benjamin bundled against her chest and Sarah beside her. The little girl's face lit up at the sight of the tree. Is it the prettiest one in the whole forest? She called excitedly. Matthew chose it, Zach replied, helping Mackenzie dismount before attending to the tree. I think he did an excellent job. The evening was spent decorating the spruce with the paper chains the children had made, strings of dried berries, and small wooden ornaments that Zach had carved over the years. Rebecca played carols on the piano while they worked, baby Benjamin sleeping peacefully in a cradle nearby. The simple joy of the occasion, the warmth of family togetherness, and the anticipation of Christmas created a magical atmosphere that Mackenzie absorbed gratefully. This was so different from the formal, sometimes stiff celebrations of her childhood, where appearances often mattered more than genuine feeling. Later, after the children were in bed, Mackenzie stood admiring the decorated tree, a mug of cider warming her hands. She sensed rather than heard Zach approach, his presence registering as a change in the air around her. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Thank you for including me." "This is your home now," he replied simply. "If you want it to be." Mackenzie turned to face him, searching his expression. "What are you saying, Zach?" He set aside his own mug, taking hers and placing it on the side table before capturing both her hands in his. "I'm saying that finding you by that river was the best thing that ever happened to me. I'm saying that these past months have shown me that life can hold joy again, not just duty." Her heart raced at his words, but she needed clarity. As a governess, a friend, as everything. His thumbs traced gentle circles on her palms. "I know it's soon. I know you came here not by choice but by circumstance. But I find myself hoping those circumstances might lead to something permanent." "Are you proposing, Zachary Blackwood?" she asked, a smile beginning to form despite her attempt at seriousness. "Inelegantly, but yes." His expression was earnest, vulnerable in a way she'd rarely seen. "I love you, Mackenzie. I think I began falling the moment I saw you weeping by the river and felt this overwhelming need to ensure you were never alone again." The echo of his first promise to her brought tears to her eyes. "I love you too," she whispered. "I wasn't looking for this for you, but somehow you became everything I never knew I needed." His kiss was gentle at first, then deepening as she responded, her arms sliding around his neck. Unlike their first embrace, hurried and emotion-laden, this one was unhurried, exploratory, full of promise for the future. When they finally parted, Zach rested his forehead against hers. "Is that a yes, then?" Mackenzie laughed softly. "Yes, though I think Sarah suspected this outcome weeks ago." "Children often see what adults try to hide," he agreed, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Rebecca has been none too subtle with her hints as well. So I'm the last to know my own heart." "No," he said tenderly. "You're the one who needed to be sure. I've been certain since the blizzard, when you appeared in that barn like some angel determined to help bring new life into the world." The memory warmed her. "That night changed something between us. It showed me your courage, your compassion, and then with Rebecca and Benjamin." He shook his head in wonder. "You belong here, Mackenzie, with the children, with the ranch, with me." "I do belong," she agreed, the truth of it settling deep in her soul. "Though I never imagined finding my place would involve delivering foals and babies." Zach laughed, pulling her close again. Life on a ranch is full of surprises. Christmas morning dawned clear and bright. Mackenzie woke early, filled with a quiet joy that had nothing to do with the holiday and everything to do with the man who had asked her to share his life. They had agreed to announce their engagement at Christmas dinner, though Mackenzie suspected Rebecca already knew, given the knowing smiles she'd been directing their way. The children's delight with their modest gifts, carved wooden animals from Zach, knitted scarves from Rebecca, and books from Mackenzie filled the morning with laughter and excitement. Baby Benjamin, oblivious to the celebration, slept peacefully in his cradle, occasionally attended by Sarah, who had taken her role as big sister very seriously. Mackenzie was helping Rebecca prepare dinner when Zach appeared in the kitchen doorway, his expression uncharacteristically hesitant. "I have something to show you," he said to Mackenzie, "if you can spare a moment." Rebecca shooed her away with a smile. "Go, this can wait." Zach led her outside to the barn, where a beautiful bay mare stood saddled in the center aisle. The horse was smaller than Zach's stallion, more suited to a woman's frame with intelligent eyes and a sleek coat. "This is Belle," Zach said, stroking the mare's neck. "She's yours if you'll have her." Mackenzie approached slowly, letting the horse sniff her outstretched hand. "She's magnificent, but Zach, this is too much." "Every rancher's wife needs her own mount," he replied, "and I hoped you might like to ride with me sometimes, not just perched in front of me like a package." The thoughtfulness of the gift touched her deeply. Belle nuzzled her hand gently as if approving of her new mistress. "She's perfect, thank you." Zach smiled, clearly pleased by her reaction. "There's something else." From his pocket he withdrew a small velvet pouch. Opening it, he tipped a ring into his palm, a simple gold band set with a small but perfect diamond that caught the winter sunlight streaming through the barn doors. "It was my mother's," he explained. "Benjamin had Rebecca's made special, but Mother left this to whichever of us married next." His expression turned wry. "I think she despaired of me ever finding someone after the war." Mackenzie's throat tightened with emotion. "It's beautiful." Taking her left hand, Zach slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if meant for her all along. "Now it's official," he said softly. "If you're certain." "I've never been more certain of anything," she assured him, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. When they returned to the house, hand in hand with the ring clearly visible on Mackenzie's finger, Rebecca's joyful tears and the children's excited questions confirmed that their announcement had been anticipated. The Christmas dinner became an impromptu engagement celebration, with even Cookie and Miguel joining them for a toast. As evening fell, with the children playing with their new toys by the fire and Rebecca nursing baby Benjamin in the rocking chair, Mackenzie stood at the window watching snowflakes begin to drift down from the darkening sky. Zach came to stand beside her, his arm slipping around her waist. "Happy?" he asked quietly. Mackenzie leaned into his embrace, marveling at how natural it felt. "Completely. Though I can't help thinking how differently this day might have gone if you hadn't found me by the river that evening." "I believe we were meant to find each other," Zach said simply. "Some things are written in the stars long before we understand them." The poetic sentiment from this practical rancher made her smile. "Perhaps you're right, though I think I'll always be grateful for the twist of fate that brought me west, even if it seemed like tragedy at the time." Zach's arm tightened around her. "I promised you wouldn't be alone. I intend to keep that promise for the rest of our lives." As Mackenzie looked around at the warm, loving home she had found at the family that had taken her in, and the man who had claimed her heart, she knew with absolute certainty that some promises were meant to last forever. Spring 1877, the wildflowers carpeted the hillside in a riot of colors: purple lupine, golden balsam root, delicate white prairie stars. Mackenzie spread a blanket beneath the sprawling cottonwood tree that marked their special place, while Zach tethered their horses nearby. "I still can't believe how quickly the landscape transforms," she remarked, smoothing the blanket. 3 months ago, this was all under snow." Zach smiled as he joined her, setting down the basket Rebecca had packed for them. "That's Montana for you extremes in all things." It had become their tradition, these Sunday afternoon rides when weather permitted. Sometimes the children accompanied them, but today was special, exactly 5 months since their wedding in January. The ceremony had been simple but meaningful, held in the ranch house parlor with Reverend Thomas officiating. Rebecca had stood as Mackenzie's attendant, while Miguel had been Zach's best man. The children had taken their roles as ring bearer and flower girl with solemn importance, and baby Benjamin had cooperated by sleeping through the proceedings. Married life had brought changes, but fewer than Mackenzie might have expected. She continued teaching the children, though they now called her Aunt Mackenzie instead of Miss Dawson. She and Zach had moved into the master bedroom, which had stood empty since Benjamin's death, Rebecca having always preferred the smaller room near the nursery. The ranch thrived under their combined care. Mackenzie had discovered an aptitude for the business side of ranching, helping Zach with correspondence and accounts. Her education and organized mind complemented his practical knowledge and experience in ways that benefited the entire operation. Now, as they shared the picnic lunch beneath the cottonwood, Mackenzie watched her husband with quiet contentment. Marriage had softened some of his harder edges, though he remained the strong, capable man who had first extended his hand to her beside the river. "What are you thinking about so intently?" Zach asked, catching her gaze. "How fortunate I am," she replied honestly. "How different my life is from what I imagined a year ago." He reached across the blanket to take her hand, his thumb brushing over her wedding ring. "Any regrets?" "Not one." She hesitated, then added, "Though I do have news that might change things somewhat." Zach's expression turned concerned. "What is it?" Mackenzie took a deep breath, her free hand moving instinctively to rest on her abdomen. "I believe we'll be welcoming a new member to the family around November." The transformation of his face was beautiful to behold, shock giving way to wonder, then pure, unbridled joy. "A baby? You're certain?" she nodded, smiling at his reaction. "As certain as I can be." Rebecca suspected first she recognized the signs before I did. In one fluid movement, Zach was beside her on the blanket, gathering her into his arms. "Mackenzie," he breathed, his voice thick with emotion. "I never thought, after the war, the doctors said." "What?" She pulled back slightly, searching his face. "What did the doctors say?" Zach looked away briefly, then met her eyes with raw honesty. "I took a piece of shrapnel at Chancellorsville. The surgeons weren't sure I could father children. It's why I never married before I couldn't ask a woman to accept that uncertainty." Understanding dawned. "You never told me." "I should have before we wed," he acknowledged. "But I feared losing you, and then it seemed too late to bring up such a thing." Mackenzie touched his face gently. "It wouldn't have changed my answer, Zach. I married you for you, not for the children we might have. And yet here we are." His hand covered hers where it rested on her still flat stomach. "A miracle." "One of many," she agreed softly. "Starting with a cowboy who found a weeping woman beside a river and promised she'd never be alone again." Zach leaned forward to kiss her, pouring all his love and joy into the connection. When they parted, he kept her close, his forehead touching hers. "That's one promise I'll keep renewing every day of our lives." As they sat together beneath the cottonwood, planning and dreaming of their future, Mackenzie reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this place. The telegram that had seemed like the end of everything had instead been the beginning, the first step on a path that led to love, family, and a happiness deeper than she had ever imagined possible. The river continued its eternal journey in the valley below, a reminder of that fateful day when two lives had intersected at exactly the right moment. And in the years to come, as their family grew and the Double B flourished, Mackenzie and Zach would often return to this spot, renewing their connection to each other and to the land that had brought them together. For sometimes, even in our darkest moments, we are exactly where we need to be. And sometimes, a promise made beside a river becomes the foundation upon which an entire life of love is built.